Well, Captain Bish Johnson is still with us in the studio. Captain, I want to quickly take you on something that Colonel Stan Lambo said. He said that, you know, Boko Haram has been defeated. It's behaving like a snake, that its head has been cut off, but the body is still wriggling. But a lot of people will be wondering, yes, it might have been decimated, but are we overestimating the work that we have done if Boko Haram is still able to get the facilities to be able to get girls out of a school, take 110 of them in trucks and out, some say out of the country? Are we underestimating the prowess of the enemy here?
Of course. The incident that took place last Monday points to that direction, that we are, underwriting what they are able to do. I don't believe that Boko Haram has been decimated. I believe that they have been largely contained. That would be the most appropriate phrase, because for them to have been able to pull off this kind of large-scale attack, pick up 110 schoolgirls, load them up in a truck, and vanish into the thin air, tells me that they have not been decimated. They have been contained, they are weak, they are wounded, but they are still able to carry out attacks. So we should not be underestimating them, because if we underestimate them and we give ourselves too much glory, we will not be able to, prepare ourselves to adequately deal with Boko Haram. Boko Haram is still very, very potent. We need to recognize that fact. If we are not recognizing that fact before Monday, after Monday, we should recognize that fact, so that due resources is allocated to the fight against Boko Haram. This thing is far from over.
Mr. Johnson, you have experience in the U.S. military, and I want to ask you, because if you look at what happened in Afghanistan and what continues to happen in Afghanistan, you're talking about the longest war, I believe, in American history. They still have not been able to solve that problem without having boots on the ground. And I want to ask you, when you look at our geographical spread, yes, how widespread that region is, Lake Chad, from Niger to Chad, of course, the northeast, how do you contain that in view of some of the challenges we had? Even if we had a supreme military, let's just assume that we did. If you have these neighboring countries and their own defense forces and their own peculiarities and their own issues, how do you deal with that issue in view of what's happening in Afghanistan, for example?
You see, dealing with insurgency, a lot of research is being done on insurgencies. One of them was done by RAND Corporation of America, and what they concluded that insurgency had always taken on average 20 years to deal with it and deal with it adequately. And now, coming down to your question, a country like Nigeria, where we have neglected a lot of stuff for a very long period of time, for example, issue of border security, we are very, very porous border, especially in the northern axis, that there is free movement of people. Most of the times, we don't know who they are. We don't know what they're coming to our country to do. It's a very, very complicated problem. But that is not to say that they are not surmountable. They are surmountable. But we must have the political will to begin to deal with these issues, removing sentiments, removing religion, removing politics, removing ethnicity. If we can exclude all these things in our national discourse, we will be able to surmount all these problems. But as long as we continue, every time we want to have a national tragedy of this nature, there is politics, there is ethnicity, there is religion, we can't get to the bottom of it.
So, you mentioned the issue, of course, of devolution of powers, the need for the creation of state police. I want to look at the structures as they are today, within what we have today.
Okay.
What's possible? Because when you talk about what the IG says or the head of immigration says, when they say, we need equipment, we need manpower, we need training, we need all these things, and they say it openly, publicly for everybody to hear.
Yeah.
But then when it comes to the institution that can give those resources, it seems to be a lot of politics. What are your thoughts on that when you talk about the National Assembly and talk about the executive and what work they need to do to make some of these things happen?
Well, I think what we're dealing with is we're dealing with the reality on the ground. Because sometimes too we say that it's not that the federal government does not want to give out these resources so that these things can be done. It's simply that they can't. They don't have enough resources that will go around to deal with all these things. They simply can't. It's not that they don't want. If you look at, for example, the issue of education and our teachers going on strike all the time, it's not that the federal government simply does not want to honor the contract they had with the lecturers. It's simply that it can't. It doesn't have the resources to do that. Because our federal government is too large. It's everywhere. So the resources that they have is spread very thin to go around. but not enough to deal with the problems that all these institutions are facing. So the bottom line is what I keep saying: let us reduce the size of the federal government, let the states fend for themselves, let there be competition, let us end this feeding bottle approach that we have been using.
No, but in fairness to the contrarian view, if you have funds that have been that you've set aside and you've said, let's just, for example, you want to put $1 billion here,
yeah,
and then it becomes a political circus,
yeah,
and then nothing gets done, and that $1 billion is not then spent on what it should be spent on. That doesn't speak to structural issues. It speaks to an issue of process, not so?
No, you see, that's the problem. Process emanates from structure. If the structure is fundamentally flawed, we don't need it's not rocket science for us to know that the process is going to be bad. If you have a bad structure, you're going to have a bad process. What are we saying? What I'm saying is that when the federal government is a jack of all trades and a master of none, and you allocate $1 billion to tackle a particular problem, and there is nobody who is there to monitor and see how this $1 billion is being utilized, of course the money is going to be misappropriated and mismanaged. So at the end of the day, you come back to square one.
So you say a devolution of power solves that problem in your mind?
The federal government, we need a smaller, thinner, leaner, smarter central government that does more of providing oversight to the federal. The bulk of the job should be done at the state level.
And finally, does your position, does it presuppose that state governments are just going to begin to act altruistically with whatever powers and funds that they're going to get from that process?
That is why the federal government provides oversight. The federal government has to regulate and supervise. The federal government is a supervisor. It cannot be a Wild West, free for all. No.
Some people argue about that. I mean, the states will say that everybody is an independent entity. I mean, you're seeing currently even the debates between INEC and, say, the SIEC in Kano State. But let's talk about, the rescue of those girls.
Okay.
Now the girls must be found. We've been told before now that the first 48 hours after,
very critical.
People are declared missing is very critical.
Correct.
It's well past 48 hours now. We're hearing stories of them being taken into Niger. What is the likelihood that we'll be able to find these girls through military, not negotiation?
Well, you see, I like to be optimistic because we put our shoes we put ourselves in the shoes of these parents. Only God knows what they are going through right now. I am optimistic that if we work with our neighbors, just like we've done in the past, we work with the Nigerian authority, something could be done. They can go beyond. They can't leave Nigeria and go beyond Niger for now. It's still within the time limit that we can still find them within either Nigeria or Niger. They've not gone beyond these two countries. So we must have to find a way to cooperate at a regional level with our neighboring countries to ensure that they don't leave the sub-region. They don't leave Nigeria, Niger, Chad area. But that has to be, we have to take the lead. The Nigerian government has to take the lead. And I'm sure that something is being done right now that you and I do not know. Is not information is given out based on the need to know.
Now, we've been told that the military has been, even the Air Force has been deployed to help survey the area, but then there'll be questions as to what are the limits of the Air Force? You can't tread into another country's airspace, can you?
Well, that is why we have to cooperate with them. I believe that we should be able to chase insurgents beyond the shores of Nigeria into Niger. And if they are chasing them to Nigeria, they should equally be able to do the same thing. But that can only happen when we have an agreement with them, which I'm sure we do have such an agreement with them from that of since this Boko Haram thing came up. There is a regional force, a task force between the various countries. I'm sure that kind of agreement is there. But you see, look, this is a complicated thing to do. The Air Force, the Army cannot do magic. What we are expecting them to do is to do magic. They can only function within the confines of their capacity, their training, their equipment, their manpower. Now, we say, they have helicopters and fighter jets. How many helicopters and how many fighter jets can we have in the air? And are we going to have them in the air for how many hours, for how many days, for how many weeks?
These are all the major questions that need to be asked. But we have to thank you most kindly for coming on Sunrise Daily. Captain Bish Johnson is a former U.S. and naval officer. Sunrise Daily continues with Gimba and Nyota in Lagos.